Attica. I know a lady, Attica. Her name was Sadie, Attica. I took her to the movie, Attica. She scratched her boogie, Attica. In the middle of the movie, Attica. Ooh, ah, Attica. Ooh, ah, Attica. I know a lady, Attica. Her name was Sadie, Attica. I took her to the movie, Attica. She scratched her boogie, Attica. In the middle of the movie, Attica. Ooh, ah, Attica.
Yeah, the young generation.
Araba Dolly, we sit nine, the booth of wine, the back of the rubber, the green line, rope, one big choke, and all of heaven, my mama.
Have you ever been mistreated? You know what I'm talking about.
Now, I'm playing that, y'all, for a reason. As our Black American history is very deep. Now, I want to play this for you right here about the Muskegees.
So explain to folks, why would they have free health care, free child benefits? What, as a result of the Muskegee Nation? Explain that.
Sure. Well, the Muskogee Creek Nation was one of the five quote-unquote civilized tribes
Fair use,
who in
YouTube.
the late 1700s, early 1800s adopted European-style culture, speaking English and having a plantation-style economy. And a part of that was the enslavement of Africans and of their own indigenous Black members.
All right, now, this brother fought the Muskegee Supreme Court, which I suspect might have some $5 Indians in there that was holding us back. This brother here, unlike the Congressional Immigrant Black Caucus that do zero, unlike Jasmine Crockett, all these lawyer Negroes in the Black Caucus that did zilch, this dude actually went to school, got his law degree, and sued for his people so they could get what was rightfully theirs. Now, I want to play something else for you as well. And there's something that you guys probably didn't see before, but I want to play this right here.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am attorney Demario Solomon Simmons. That's DAMARIO SOLOMON-SIMMONS. And along with my co-counsel who are here from my firm, which is David Riggs and Chris Kepsu, who you will also hear from, we are excited and honored to have this opportunity to represent these so-called Creek Freedmen in our quest. And I say our quest because I'm designated as a Creek Freedman myself, erroneously, our quest for citizenship, full citizenship within the Creek Nation. I'm proud to stand here with our clients, some of our named clients. We have Rhonda Grayson, we have Sharon Lindsay, we have Jeff Kennedy, who are named clients, and they're also board members of the organization that we represent, the Muskogee Creek Indian Freedmen Vann. We have a couple other named clients who are not here today. Johnny, not here yet. Johnny Mae Austin, and we have a minor child who we cannot mention her name. This is a historic day, a fantastic day. We're excited to be here. It's been a long road for so many people who've been fighting this fight. And I just want to tell you a little bit first about who are the so-called Creek Freedmen. The Creek Nation in the old country in the southeastern United States of America was a confederacy of nations and tribes and people. And within that confederacy included people that you would consider to be Black or Creeks of African descent. In the 1830s, when we were removed from our traditional homeland here to Oklahoma Territory, or Indian Territory, which we now know as Oklahoma, on that trail of tears, so to speak, that also included Creeks of African descent, some enslaved, many free, and also what we would consider to be free Blacks or free Africans. They came to the Creek Nation or Indian Territory. They were here, they were productive citizens up until the Civil War. The Civil War split the nation. You had some Creeks who sided with the Confederacy, called the Southern Creeks. You had other Creeks who were what we call loyal Creeks, which included many of the Creeks of African descent. At the end of the Civil War and the treaties were being negotiated, there were 5 individuals who participated in those negotiations and signed that treaty of 1866. One of those individuals was a Creek of African descent, or African Creek, by the name of Cal Tom, who was my 4-time great-grandfather. He signed that treaty, and in that treaty, you have a copy of it. All our media members and anyone else that wants a copy, we'll give it to you. Article 2 of that treaty simply says, or clearly says, that Creeks of African descent shall have and enjoy all the rights and privileges of Native citizens, including an equal interest in the soil and national funds.
Which means, let me chime in a bit here, all them $5 Indians and these folks that get showed up and wanted to write something on the Dawes roll, you got to cut them in too, because you've been denying their rights. You own these folks and you denied their rights, and you have to give it up.
And the laws of said nation shall be equally binding upon them, and give equal protection of all such persons and all others whatsoever of race or color. That is where we are today. Because from 1866 until the Dawes Commission arose, which first started with the Dawes
Fair use, YouTube, fair use.
1893. And then when they created, 1887, when they created the Dawes Commission in 1893. And then in 1898, the Curtis Act, where they forcibly enrolled Creek citizens. It was the United States government that segregated so-called Creek Freedmen. It was the United States government that used the hypo-descent rule that said 1 drop of blood.
So for Johnny-come-latelys, folks that say, well, we just gonna show up and collect a check, that don't apply to you. That don't apply to you. You fresh off the boat, or you want to ride the reparations, movement, or what, that don't apply to you at all. You don't just get to show up 5 minutes later and say, well, I'm black. No, you got to be rope in line with some of these folks. These folks right here done put in the work. They done put in the paperwork. This man went to school for this. It's the morally right thing to do. You don't just get to show up and just say, well, I'm black, or, maybe 700 years ago, I might have been connected to King Tut. No. You need to be connected with these folks right here. You don't just get to show up and start talking about what's divisive. No, you don't.
Black blood makes you black. It was United States government that created a separate role of so-called Creeks by blood and so-called Creek Freedmen. That was not something that the Creeks did themselves. However, in 1979, the Creek Nation, relying upon this openly racist Dawes rolls, decided to segregate, strip, and steal the heritage, culture, and citizenship of those so-called Creek Freedmen and their descendants. And their descendants are here today. I would like for the Black Creek or so-called Creek Freedmen descendants to please stand. Please just stand and be recognized. Please stand. These individuals and so many more across this nation grew up speaking Creek, living Creek ways. They understood what it meant to be Creek. And just like my grandmother, Johnny Mae Austin, just had it ripped from them, illegally, ripped from them, and told that they were not who they are. They are Creek people, period, point blank. The treaty says so, but more importantly, our history says so.
Now, you would have people to this day that would tell them, well, they don't know anything beyond whatever Creek existence they have. Y'all are lost. Y'all are lazy. You don't know nothing about your history and all this hogwash. And they're saying, hey, well, damn it, we got a grievance. We were here in this country and we built something. We're the former slaves. We were enslaved. We were degraded. We were undermined. And we're old. We not gonna listen to nobody telling us, hey, you know, you don't know nothing about your history. You're just some old lost, you know, mediocre Negro. That's not gonna happen. Because see, if this were to happen to the Ukraine, if this were to happen to illegal alien, anybody else, if this same story comes along, don't nobody got no problem hearing them out. Ain't nobody telling them, well, you know, you don't know your history and this, that, and the third. Ain't nobody telling them that. They only tell that to black folk. You need to skip the past 200 to 300 years and say the hell with it and embrace something else. That's what they want you to see. Some folks are mad about this because this brother done went and put in the work, and he's doing what he rightfully should do. He went and did the research. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna share this so y'all can see it. I'm gonna put this into YouTube when I'm done, because this is something worth seeing. And the reason why I say that is this is what you do when you're trying to get your people on board and get what's rightfully theirs. For physical people that was in his bloodline, in his family, just a few generations, you know, that were not removed. He went and did the history. He's doing the right thing. There's nothing wrong with what he's doing. Only somebody from Arkham Asylum would say that what he's doing is wrong. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. And I want to open up something with some context. Now, this is how long a lot of them have been fighting for this. And then we're going to go into some anthropology. Now, this is 22 pages, so we may not read all of it, but you guys have probably not saw this. Yeah, I know you got the feathers or whatever, but this is a testimony. This is a real person. This ain't somebody that gets up here plebiscite battling. Descendants of freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes Association. This is in Oklahoma City. So this is the testimony of Marilyn Vann, president of Descendants of Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes Association, presented to the United States Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, oversight hearing on select provisions of the 1866 Reconstruction Treaties, Indian Affairs between the United States and Oklahoma Indian Tribes, July 22nd, 2022. So these folks actually went in and put in the work. They actually went and said, wait a minute, my family members were aggrieved. I need to be heard. There was people that was hurt in this process, and these are my family. Greetings, Chairman Scatz, Ranking Member Makowski, and distinguished members of the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. My name is Marilyn Vann, and I serve as the president of the Descendants of Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes Association, which is an Oklahoma-based nonprofit. Now, I don't know who is Ranking Member Makowski, who's Chairman Scatz. So let's look this person up. I'm wondering who this is. Brian Scatz. Okay. All right. Born in the Jewish American family, Ann Arbor. Okay. I was wondering. I just want to make sure. Oh. Indian Affairs, Vice Chairman of Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, to advancing Native priorities and honoring the federal trust responsibility to American Indians. Okay. Well, okay. So I guess he's on the Senate committee. My name is Marilyn Vance, and I serve as, okay, I said that already. The organization educates the public on the 1866 treaties, which created citizenship rights for the black freedmen and freedmen descendants of the 5 civilized tribes, which is Cherokee Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and Chickasaw Nation. Now, I was going to say this later on, but I had a conversation with my older sister, and I didn't grow up with her. My dad was so much of a Rolling Stone, I would say. Now, I told y'all that I had 2 sisters. They was quote unquote half red native, right? So they were part of one of the tribes. Like, actually, one of my sisters right now, she lives on a reservation. So now those 2 of my sisters that was quote unquote half so-called red native, one of their uncles was a big activist here in Minnesota, and I think he recently passed. Let me see if I can find his name. Key figures. He was somebody big. Was his name Dennis Banks? My grandma told me about him. Was it Dennis Banks? Let me see. I think his name was Dennis Banks. It might have been Dennis Banks. When did he die? Yep, in 2017. I think that might have been him. Let me take a look real quick. So yeah, from the Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota, Ojibwe. So yeah, my sisters are Ojibwe. Their mother was Ojibwe, I believe. So he's been putting in work for forever. You know what I'm saying? He's been putting in work since the 60s. So I think this is the guy right here. But I believe that was my sister's uncle, from what I've been told. Okay, anyway. All right, we're just talking history here. So the reason why I say that, my older sister, which is the eldest of us all, we were just talking about family history. And she told me that she had a lot of folks on her side, I think her mother's side. And I asked them, I said, well, did you ever hear anything about, the stuff we're talking about now? Did you hear about that and stuff like that? And she said, well, I've seen pictures of a lot of my great aunts, great grandparents, or whatever the case may be, and they all Choctaw. All of them. They're Choctaw, or they were something else. I can't remember what it was. So she was just kind of telling about, talking to us about that side of the family. So I'd have to talk to her more about that or whatever, because I just like to have the family history. I just want to know. I was just curious. You know what I'm saying? So now they mentioned the Cherokee, the Muskogee, Seminole, because remember you had Seminole blacks down in Florida and different places. Choctaw, that's typically from Mississippi, and Chickasaw. So all these 5 so-called civilized tribes, they got their wine, they got their fine clothes, and they sold a bunch of Negroes. They chased runaways. That's what they did. So it says the association also works for an end to federal and tribal discrimination against freedmen descendants and tribal enrollment. Now, mind you, shout out to Barack Obama. Before he got out of office, he made sure a lot of the Indian tribes got over $3 billion. He didn't do nothing for the freedmen. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And The Cherokee tribe at one point had denied blacks, so this association, they said it works tribal discrimination and receiving federal and tribal funded services available to members and citizens of federally recognized tribes. So what this was all about was some money. We don't want you Negroes to get a bag. That's why they denied them. They didn't just deny them just because they didn't like them. Oh, I don't like that Negro because he's black. Hey, I ain't trying to share this money. Our organization has members and official supporters through the U.S. and incorporated in 2002. I have been president of the organization since incorporation. On behalf of the association, I want to thank the committee for holding today's hearing and for issuing an invitation to me to testify before you today on this important issue. I am a member of the Cherokee Nation. Let me blow this up for y'all. And was a litigant in the D.C. federal court litigation, Cherokee Nation versus Nash and Vann v. Sink, and all the historical research for the legal briefs. These cases reaffirmed the 1866 treaty rights to tribal membership of Cherokee Freedmen descendants. In 2021, I was also a litigant in Cherokee Nation tribal court case, parentheses, Mays versus Cherokee Nation Election Commission in Vann, which dealt with the rights of freedmen tribal members to hold office. So they was messing around with the office rights. Although I am not an attorney, I am a retired engineering team leader. So these ain't no little janky black folks that's doing this. These are black folks that went to work. They ain't just looking, they looking for a handout. No, these are some. Now listen to this. I have spoken on the history and the rights of the freedmen descendants for almost 20 years, including at the Immigrant Congressional Black Caucus Foundation meetings in 2007 and 2008. Now, our Black Caucus, that should have been riding for this for the past 45 years, they ain't really been doing too much. But anyway, I also was a witness for the House Financial Services Subcommittee, Housing, Insurance, and Community Development Committee on Financial Services, July 27, 2021. My ancestors on the federal Dawes Indian tribal rolls were registered as Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw freedmen. Although I do have documented Cherokee and Chickasaw Indian ancestors who died prior to the Dawes enrollment. So the Dawes enrollment came out in the 1800s, okay? By education, I have a BS degree in engineering and retired from the federal government as Treasury Department engineering team leader with 32 years of federal service. So this ain't somebody that's just plebiscite babbling and BSing around. This is somebody that actually put work in on this damn country. They have a right to speak. Background and general history. Prior to 1492, a system of slavery had existed in some form within these tribes in our original pre-removal homelands, now the southeastern United States. However, slavery was not based on a person's race, but the conquering of other Indian tribes. Enslaved Indians were often adopted into tribal nations over time. The earliest known contact of African enslaved people was with the DeSoto exhibition in 1541, when DeSoto traveled through the southern tribes. 2 enslaved Africans on DeSoto's exhibition escaped and were later adopted one of the Creek tribal towns. After 1492, persons of African ancestry were occasionally adopted as members of the tribes or became members through Indian mothers. However, this practice became almost non-existent as the Indian system of slavery began to be associated with persons of African ancestry and chattel slavery as more and more mixed white tribal citizens brought enslaved Africans into the tribal nations. White tribal citizens, $5 Indians. Some of these tribes wrote their first slave codes before the Indian removal treaties. Enslaved Africans were also taken on the trails of tears by their tribes to do the hard, dirty work of clearing fields, carrying bags, chopping wood, etc., so that the rest of the tribe could more easily survive and build new Indian plantations in the removal treaties lands of Indian territory. So these folks were sitting around drinking wine, riding Cadillacs. They didn't have that Cadillac by that time, but I'm just saying. They was just sitting around not doing no work and having the Negroes do all the work. Tribal laws were passed which limited the rights of persons of African descent to read and write, to own personal property, to marry Indians, to vote, except in the Seminole Nation, the Seminole Maroons, they allowed that, it seems like. Prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, African chattel slavery had become a main part of economic wealth for some tribal citizens. Because Indian slavers didn't own personal land, their wealth was based on the number of enslaved Africans they owned. The 5 tribes in 1861 signed treaties with the Confederate States, with the continuation of African chattel slavery being a primary reason for the alliance with the Confederate States. Although not all tribal members owned slaves, the leadership of the 5 tribes were slave owners, and many of them tribal members' wealth was due to the slave economy. Some of the tribal slavers owned hundreds of slaves, lived in mansions, and had large plantations. The free Africans of the 5 tribes were persons of African ancestry legally living within the 5 tribes at the beginning of the Civil War. Though the majority of Africans were enslaved under tribal law, although the official governments of the 5 tribes and the most of the Indian troops fought for the Confederacy, there were 3 Union regiments. The United States required new treaties with all of the 5 tribes after the Civil War. The 1866 treaties of the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole Nations, adopted after the Civil War between the tribes and the United States government, ended slavery in those tribes and set up provisions for tribal citizenship of the former enslaved Africans, with provisions giving freedmen all the rights of native Indians of their tribal nation. The 1866 treaties between the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations and the U.S. government gave each of these tribes the option to adopt the freedmen, in which case the tribe would receive a payment from the U.S. government. The Choctaw Nation adopted the freedmen in 1883 and received the funds they were entitled to as stated in the 1866 treaty. The summary of the Choctaw and Chickasaw conditions of their enslaved Africans and descendants, found in Article 3 and 4 of their 1866 Joint Reconstruction Treaty, is the following. The Choctaw Nation was paid its full share of the funds and interest. The Chickasaw Nation was paid only a part of its share of interest because it failed to carry out the key requirements of the treaty. What were the key requirements of the treaty, people? The Choctaw freedmen were adopted by the Choctaw and hence were not eligible for any of the 300 grand. And the Chickasaw freedmen were not adopted by the Chickasaw, but did not move from Chickasaw lands and hence were not eligible for any of the 300 grand. Now here it talks about the Article 3 of the 1866 treaty required that the 300 grand be held in trust by the Choctaw and Chickasaw at a 5% annual interest. Now you go down here in 1903, the U.S. Court of Claims found that the Chickasaw freedmen had not been adopted because the 1873 Act had been withdrawn before 1894. So yeah, Johnny come latelys. Well, yeah, you know, I'm black too, but I'm from the islands. Nigga, no. You ain't qualified. It says it right here. Yeah. No, you're not, sir. Or ma'am, you are not. We could bend history if we want to. The freedmen of the 5 tribes, slaves and their descendants of Indians, relationship was the same as the U.S.'s relationship to the tribe. That is, the freedmen were, in essence, wards of the U.S. government in relation to the U.S. Congress plenary power to relate to the tribes. They put this in bold. In effect, freedmen were colonial subjects that were not legally sophisticated enough to advocate for their own best interests. So, the U.S. had a higher standard of duty to act for them. More professionally stated, as guardians of the freedmen's best interests, the U.S. breached its duty by not taking vigorous measures to see that the best interests of the freedmen were served in requiring the tribes to keep the freedmen as citizens rather than the course that was taken, unfortunately. It goes in to talk about the 19th century. It goes in to talk about the Dawes Final Rolls that were made by the U.S. government between 1898 and 1906 to distribute lands of the 5 tribes owned in common to the citizens of tribal members. We got all the statutes. This person did their homework. They started talking about a 1926 Oklahoma Supreme Court case, Sango versus Willie. The court made it clear that a Dawes enrolled Creek freedwoman whose mother was listed as a 1/4 for Creek by blood on the Dawes roll is a non-Indian for allotment purposes. Oklahoma became a state in 1907 with the state constitution defining all persons except Negroes as legally white. Negroes with any amount of African ancestry were required to be segregated in schools, restaurants from persons of all races in Oklahoma, not just the Jim Crow South. Not allowed to marry with the persons of other races. Shout out to Leonardo DiCaprio. Grandfather clause laws were passed, which stripped black Oklahomans of the right to vote in state and congressional elections until these laws were overthrown by the U.S. Supreme Court. Goodwin versus United States. These laws did not affect persons with no African ancestry. So if you black, you can't get no justice. By the middle of the 20th century, the Department of Interior began to issue certificates of Indian blood cards based on the degrees of blood assigned by the Dawes Commission. Descendants of freedmen are unable to acquire the Department of Interior cards for this region. During the first half of the 20th century, the U.S. government began to use the degrees of blood to limit access to tribal services or Indian preference by barring persons with lower blood quantum from accessing federal services or federal jobs at the DOI for Indians. So this is basically I'm white, not say so. 1866 treaties, freedmen provisions in the historic background. I'll let y'all look that at yourself. This is something you want to read yourself. This is some good stuff. I mean, they really did their homework. Need for congressional action. Income-based. The Choctaw and Chickasaw Freedmen Treaty allowed these nations to limit freedmen to 40 acres, if adopted in sharp contrast to other tribal members, including adopted whites, who received 300 acres allotments. So they were undermining black folk left and right. Establishment of sundown towns in cities such as Henrietta in the Muskogee Creek Nation, where all blacks were forced out in the 1921 Greenwood, North Tulsa Community Race Massacre, is located in the Cherokee Nation Reservation. Compounded poverty of freedmen citizens. Freedmen citizens such as attorney B.C. Franklin, the father of historian John Hope Franklin, who was a Dawes enrolled Choctaw freedman, lost all of their assets in the massacre. This person that wrote this up, they're not making this up. I'm not going to go into all of this. This is tried and true. That's how we won that Supreme Court case. From testimonies like this. I'm about to download this again. So niggas going online talking about pretendians. Yeah, he won the case. He won the case. You see? These were black folks that were undermined, that were enslaved, and they're old. And you don't need a damn feather, and we don't need to dance around a teepee in order to get that check. That's not needed. Don't give me a feather, give me my check. I don't need a feather. Just give me my check. And they should have it. So now, I want to go into this real quick. This is the Creek Supreme Court. Uh-oh. Supreme Court of the Muscogee Creek Nation. What happened to that? Oh. Well, looks like I got it already in the PDF. Hey, Creek Nation, what's up with the link? Are y'all a little salty you lost? Okay, so now in the Muscogee Creek Nation Supreme Court, Rhonda Grayson and Jeffrey D. Kennedy respondents. So this is when it was filed on July 23rd. Okay. So, order and opinion. This looks like some Creek stuff right here. I don't know how to read it, and black folks probably know how to read it already. I don't know what that means. But right here it says, for centuries, our people have endured removal from our homelands, forced assimilation and near extinction in exchange for promises from the federal government. So I want y'all to understand something, man. When people start talking about what we ain't owed, and black folks are asking for handouts and what they ain't gonna get and what they shouldn't get and this, that, and the third, and you need to pull up your bootstraps and this, that, and the third. This was the U.S. government that implemented this stuff. They were lockstep. The United States Supreme Court has honored these treaties and held the government to its word. Today, our nation's Supreme Court is presented with a similar challenge. Are the Creek Freedmen and their descendants entitled to all the rights and privileges of native Creek citizens as guaranteed by the Treaty of 1866? This is something that Dr. Claude Anderson has been stomping for before I was born. Before I was born, he's been riding for this because he knows what's owed. Okay? Background, Treaty of 1866. In September of 1866, 5 months after the surrender of the Confederacy and the end of the American Civil War, a delegation was sent by President Andrew Johnson to Fort Smith, Arkansas, for the purpose of renegotiating new treaties with any of the Indian nations located within Indian country or in the state of Kansas. The position of the United States was that those nations, having entered into treaties with the so-called Confederate States and the rebellion being now ended, were left without any treaty whatsoever or treaty obligations for protection by the United States. The federal government required that any new treaty negotiated by this delegation included the stipulation that the institution of slavery, which has existed among several of the tribes, must be forthwith abolished, and measures taken for the unconditional emancipation of all persons held in bondage, and for their incorporation into the tribes on an equal footing with the original members or suitably provided for. See, here's what y'all need to understand. You don't have to wear a feather hat and be a so-called, what they call a pretendian. This dude went and filed the paperwork. For all these babbling Negroes on the internet talking about, well, you got to put a feather on your head, or, man, you know, y'all ain't gonna get nothing and all. He won the court case because this is what he did. That's how he won it. He won the court case by going in there, putting in work, and providing the evidence. He lost a few times and still got it cracking. And watch how many Negroes you gonna see that's gonna come out talking about, well, man, you know, let me get a piece. Let me see if I got a little bit of, yeah, you gonna start having a whole bunch of niggas like that that's gonna be coming out. They ain't gonna turn it down if they get a letter in the mail. People talk that SHI. They ain't gonna turn it down if they get a letter in the mail. They ain't gonna say, no, I don't want that bread, or I don't want them benefits. They not gonna do that. You know how niggas is. Niggas gonna take that. They can talk all that, you know, all that tough talk all they want. They ain't gonna say no if they get a letter talking about, yeah, we got 10 bands a month for you. We got 2-3 bands a month for you. Come on down to the casino and get your check, or whatever they offer. they're not going to deny it if they got a letter in the mail. Them niggas gonna be checking the Dolls Act trying to see if they could get something, while they was sitting up there talking about what ain't nobody gonna get. This is law, y'all. That's all it is. It's law. It's words. The race soldiers have basically propagated a lifestyle in which they can undermine black people and non-blacks, you know, to make sure you don't get your due diligence. It's all about precedence. You had to have somebody that came out. Now, I want to go back to something else real quick. And I do this occasionally. Now, while you're leading Congressional Black Caucus member keeps talking about what Jamaicans have done and have added to the United States of America, you sit here and look at this and you don't see nothing about the Freedmen. They talking about promoting U.S. policy initiatives in Africa, when you got niggas right over here that's been in this bitch for over 300 to 400, 500 years. This is one of them right here. This jerk chicken nigga, this jerk chicken eat nigga right here. Her right here. You didn't hear her say nothing about the Cherokee Freedmen. See, she wasn't around when this was going on, when the founding members was getting it going in the 60s. These were the people that established it. I heard Conyers was the writer. I don't know a whole lot, but what I'm saying is this. Now, as you can see, and I always talk about this, Pan-Africanism, apartheid in South Africa. This is further proof. We was stomping back then. We shut that shit down. This ain't something they're making up. This didn't help us. That nigga didn't do nothing. See, they like their little dinners. This is the chair right here. She don't qualify for the Choctaw and the Freedmen. She's talking about her congressional Caribbean heritage. Proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants. You couldn't get it cracking back home, so you over here telling us that we don't really need to be concerned about our last couple hundred years. Yeah, you can't get no information. You can't get no support for the Cherokee Freedmen that was trying to get their reparations. I ain't seen nothing under here. There's not one thing for reparations on the Congressional Black Caucus, y'all. Those are the past chairs. Plantation Clyburn's one of them. Largemouth Bass Waters was one of them. All these niggas, you got her, Mexican Karen, of course. Yeah, we know about you too, nigga. All these Negroes, and we can't get no reparations passed. And this is now the chair. Ain't said nothing about the Cherokee Freedmen. Ain't said nothing about this right here. Nothing. Not a word. Because she don't come from that lineage, so she don't give a damn. And folks are trying to convince us that this ain't a problem. So guess what? I want to look into something else. Black American anthropology. They talk about ethnogenesis. Remember when Fiddler was telling Kunta, hey, you a new nigga now. This new culture and everything. So I just want to I wanted to know about Black American anthropology. Now, what is it? It's the field within anthropology that focuses on the study of Black American culture and ethnogenesis within the United States. This field encompasses various subdisciplines, including cultural, physical, and linguistic anthropology. All right? Now look at this here. Black American is an ethnic group constituted via the amalgamation of American Indians, particularly those of southeastern woodlands, so they're probably talking about Mississippi, with Western Europeans and African populations stretching from Senegambia to Madagascar. Right here. So the feather hat niggas, just for y'all. There you go. This origin has been documented by a number of anthropologists. Now, this is from Bartel Renee, which wrote The American Triracial African Native Contact, Multi-Ethnic Native American Nations, and the Ethnogenesis of Triracial Groups in North America. Now, when you go down here, I've already did a little research. I think it's an interesting read. I don't think there's nothing wrong with learning your history. Oh, well, hell, I didn't know this was free. Shit, let me download it. I think I'll copy that too. So y'all have some sources. I sure will. I'm going to give y'all all the sources when I upload this. African Native Contact. Now, they done their homework. These look like their dissertations. This don't look like somebody that gets plebiscite babbling. All right? Come back to that in a minute. Contact between Native Americans and Africans is as old as the contact between Native Americans and Europeans. Because the first Europeans entering the Americans brought Africans and the Atlantic Creoles of color with them slave or bonded as sailors, seamen, workers, indentured servants, and slaves. Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans usually communicated in Pidgin English or French, which might have been used in communication in Europe and Africa already. The first mentioning of Pidgin English among American Indian dates from 1641 in Massachusetts. They used trade languages such as Mogollon jargon, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and African Americans learned Native American languages fast. Though there was some scholarly debate regarding the mechanism of collective enslavement as a point of contact between Africans and natives in colonial America, it nevertheless is the prevailing explanation for the Native American ancestry of Black Americans. There are several publications that adhere to the aforementioned slave lore and the theory claiming that the reason for the intermixture of Native Americans with African Americans was their collective enslavement, working side by side as slaves. Some authors even claim that American Indian slaves were absorbed by African American society. They, American Indian slaves, were thrown closely with the Negroes, and the fact that they eventually disappeared indicated that they intermarried with and were absorbed by the large body of blacks. And look at this this is early of 20th century description of Black American ethnogenesis. Well, you Negroes ain't got no culture. We are the culture. We got proof. The American Negro must be regarded as one of the newest kinds of mankind. Fiddler, Roots, does that sound familiar? He represents the effect of a considerable amount of mixture among different African varieties, American Indians, and whites of every kind, principally whites of British origin. Like I was telling my homie the other day, I said, yeah, the Brits in the UK, them folks over there owe a huge bag. They supplied the boats and the payment for the boats and the construction of the boats. Out of this mixture has come the unique type or ethnic group represented by the American Negro. The type is even yet in process of formation, and all the evidences indicate that while the American Negro occupies, so far as his physical characters are concerned, a position intermediate between the African Negro on the one hand and the white and American Indian on the other. He will, if the social barriers against intermarriage and miscongeniation are maintained, tend to stabilize around a type which is rather more Negroid than otherwise. Even so, his physical structure will continue to be characterized by many elements bearing the marks of his white and Indian ancestry. That's what they said in their early 20th century description of the ethnogenesis. Per DNA evidence, Black Americans were descendants of Native Americans who encountered enslaved African people via plantations or refuge and intermixed with European prior to the Civil War. Using track lengths, a 2015 23andMe related study estimated that initial admixture between Europeans and the Native Americans occurred 12 generations ago, followed by subsequent African admixture 6 generations ago, consistent with other admixture inference methods dating African American admixture. However, there's evidence to suggest admixture between Native Americans and Africans prior to European admixture, as seen with individuals buried in Cottican Furnace Cemetery. That was in 1774. Cottican Furnace, right here. In this cemetery. Where is this cemetery? Maryland, of course. All right. Now, this is from Edwin Harney, Stephen Micheletti, The Genetic Legacy of African Americans from Cottican Furnace. At the population level, the Cottican individuals have diverse ancestry with clear genetic links to Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Most individuals have primarily sub-Saharan African ancestry with the strongest ties to present-day peoples in Senegambia and West Central Africa, a region that primarily encompasses present-day Angola and the DRC. Now remember, when I told you, when I was at work, they were talking about putting a statue that pointed towards Angola in Virginia. They were going to spend a bunch of money trying to get a statue going. And I had to mention, because they obviously didn't know about foundational Black American history, because they probably had some suspected tethers in that Zoom call. I ain't confirmed that 100%, but I really starting to believe so. They was doing all kinds of little coon tap dance and shit on that Zoom call that I'm going to tell y'all later. But anyway, they were talking about, well, let's put a statue that points to Angola. How about you help the niggas in Louisiana State Penitentiary that's innocent? How about you do that? They always want to give us some symbolic gesture so we can sit there and talk about the first Negro that did this and the first Negro that did that. And, oh, let's have a fried chicken and sit up there and just look at a statue. How about you actually help the people that are living? How about that? So it says these findings accord with historical records that show the slave ships originating from Senegambia, particularly before the end of the 18th century, and West Central Africa accounted for the highest disembarkation rates in Maryland over the course of the transatlantic slave trade. He also says, from the Genetic Legacy of African Americans from Cottican Furnace, y'all never heard of Cottican Furnace. I'm giving y'all some new game here. Over 1/4 of individuals, N equals 7, could be modeled as having no detectable European admixture. This is in sharp contrast to nearly all present-day self-identifying African Americans who typically have at least some European-derived ancestry. So now they talk about the cultural anthropology for all the "you ain't got no culture" Negroes. This is from Andrew Billingsley, Climbing Jacob's Ladder, The Enduring Legacies of African American Families. Now, if y'all want to know who this is, this guy is a sociologist, author, and a lecturer. He died in 1984, was born in 1975. He was born in Marion, Alabama. So he had focusing on sociology for Black American Studies at Howard, University of California. So if we want to know who he is, let's just do our homework. Okay, this is him. He said the Black American community is not held together by white oppression and racism. There was strong evidence to support the view that the Black American people have reasons of their own to cling together, quite apart from external oppression. For example, the Black church does not exist simply because the white church is oppressive. Black religion is a qualitatively different experience altogether and exists parallel, but not subservient to white religion. He has several other things that he talked about. So it talks about our culture, physical anthropology. I won't really get into too much of that, but it gives a principal component analysis of early American Blacks. You see? So you can take a look at that. I don't really know a whole lot about this stuff, so I'm not going to kind of ramble on about it. Linguistic anthropology, African American vernacular English. We have culture. This is our culture. Let's look at the origins. Let's see if we get some dates. What is this here? Oh, this is a speech example. Let me get this on here.
My father used to cut hair on the weekend and to make ends meet. And so
That's
a
Bobby
guy
Womack.
came to him one day and say, "Womack, I got a guitar here." He said, "But you give me a haircut for a couple of months, it's your guitar." And I remember it was a Kangaroo. That was the name of the guitar. And it looked better than any piece of furniture we had. So my father told me, he said, "If you ever touch this guitar," he said, "you're going to have to deal with me." He said, "I'm going to whip you into the middle of next week." That was his exact words. So when my father left every morning.
Man, ain't nobody got no style like us, man. Y'all quit playing with us, man. Here's another one. Oh, it's got Eric Adams. Let's see what he...
Well-trained people can make the right...
I don't want to hear Eric Adams. Okay, who's this?
Now joining us is Falcon 6th round pick, Mr. Russell Gage from LSU. Russ, talk about the emotion, man. I know it feels good right now to finally get your name called, get that call. What was it like when you first got that call?
Oh, man, it was like a huge boulder lifted off my shoulders, man. You know, I've been waiting on this all my life. It's a dream come true.
Man, we developed our own damn style. It says many pronunciation features set AAVE apart from other forms of American English. McBorder argues that what truly unites all, what are you talking about, Black Americans? Accent is a uniquely wide-ranging annotation, pattern, or melody which characterizes even the most neutral or light African American accent. A handful of multi-syllabic words in AAVE differ from general American in their stress placement so that, for example, police, guitar, and Detroit are pronounced with the initial stress instead of ultimate stress. Vowels, all of that. That's something that we created. You can look at this. They got whole studies on how we talk, the way we say things. Look at all of this here. You dig? We are the culture. But I ain't really got to go too much further, man. What I was gonna do is I was going to look into the Muskegee case, so we could kind of look into that, because like I say, this lawyer, he wasn't just talking about, he was mentioning indigenous and stuff like that. This nigga ain't just talking out his ass. You don't get to go into Supreme Court and just babble. They don't allow you to do that. So he had his stuff together. You know what I'm saying? Talking about his family members and this, that, and the third. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of give y'all that. And like I said, I kind of wanted to do that and kind of read through that so people could kind of understand how this Supreme Court, how this became to be. You know what I'm saying? How he won the case. That's the first thing. How he won the case, and how he was using all of the historical references in order to do so. You see what I'm saying? So, like I say, it's undeniable. That's for the history books. This has been something that's been going on for a very, very, very long time, that we should have had our congressional black caucuses. Where was Kamala on this? Where was Jasmine Crockett on this? Where's all these so-called pro-black Negroes? Where were they? This should have been going on. This should have been fixed by the 80s. It shouldn't have took. Johnny Cochran was talking about trying to do it. Johnny Cochran was actually trying to work on a lot of this stuff. And then he met his demise. You know, they say he had cancer or whatever. I don't know. Ain't no telling. You know what I'm saying? But, man, I'm telling you, man, this is that, and that's another testament to how hard we work and what we get past. A lot of these little outside the country, the stuff I hear about reparations and stuff like that, a lot of these folks have been kind of riding off our coattail for the last few years. They look at us and see what we're doing over here because we're pretty much the force multipliers when it comes to this. That's not up for debate, man. You know, it's not that it's a competition. We ain't got to worry about no competition. You know what I'm saying? But the thing is, you know, those brothers and sisters probably got a lot of flack. They probably had a lot of people talk about what you ain't gonna do, what you can't get, or whatever. They said the same thing when we was on the plantation. Y'all ain't gonna get off this plantation. Oh, you ain't gonna get civil rights. You ain't gonna get this. You ain't gonna get that. You hear a lot of that. We've been hearing that since day one. So we're not really, we ain't gotta really worried about what people are saying or what people think or whatever. They just going to follow our lead. That's it. We're, you know, the United States. We made the United States a world power. Everybody else going to follow. That's it, man. It ain't no two ways about it. You know what I'm saying? And it ain't no disrespect to nobody. But people should have been supporting this from the jump. You know what I'm saying? I've been hearing about this 1866 Indian Treaties thing. I think the first time I heard about it was through Dr. Claude Anderson. And now it's come to the fruition. He's probably proud to see it. Like, okay, I've been fighting for this for a minute. You know, and you had one black person. And he probably had some support too, of course. But you had one black person that actually went and want to go see about this. But it shouldn't have took this long. And no disrespect to the brother, the lawyer. I'm just saying this should have been ironed out in the 80s. But see, what one thing I will say about when I went in 2017, when I went to North Minneapolis Auditorium to listen to Umar, he was right. These black churches, man, are in cahoots with a lot of these political organizations and the powers to be. They pay them to not do nothing. They ain't like the ones in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s and stuff like that. They paid these niggas to not do anything. They paid them to be bootlicking salamander, sea lamprey sambos. Bootlicking salamander, sea lamprey, amphibious assault sambos. They paid them to do that, and they get sit back and let us get slaughtered out here, knowing damn well we need the support, and they won't say anything. They won't chastise. They won't chastise nothing. They don't even stand on the Bible, to be quite honest. 85 to 87% of these black churches are totally worthless. They could go away tomorrow, and it won't do us no harm. They're actually a detriment to us, many of them. It ain't like back in the day, and that was probably many years ago. I mean, I think Margaret Sanger came in there and paid some niggas. Let me see, when was Margaret Sanger? Let me just see, because this will tell you on when they start getting compromised. This will tell you when they start getting compromised. The Negro Project. Oh, this from New York University. The Negro Project. Birth control or race control. Yeah, she didn't mean nothing for us. The Negro Project, instigated in 1939. Developed by white birth control reformers who consulted with African Americans for help in promoting the project, the Negro Project. Widely supported. We got to look into this. I'll be damned. Mary McLeod Bethune, Du Bois, Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, influenced strongly by both the eugenics movement and the progressive welfare programs of the New Deal, the Negro Project was from the start largely indifferent to the needs of the black community and constructed in terms with perceptions that today smack of racism. (1937) First state to incorporate birth control statewide public health, followed by 6 other southern states. However, these successes were clouded by the failure of birth controllers to overcome segregated health services and improve black American access to contraceptives. Hazel Moore, a veteran lobbyist and health administrator, ran a birth control project under Sanger's direction and found that black women in several Virginia counties were very responsive to birth control education. So yeah, they were trying to wipe us out. Well, I'd have to do a little more research on this. But Bethune, Du Bois, Clayton Powell Jr., I hope they weren't a part of that. I really hope they weren't a part of that. The 1916 Project, a documentary about Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, urged black pastors to oppose abortion during a segment of, let me see. It is an allusion to the 1619 Project. Uh-oh. Okay, this is pointing back to this. But yeah, this is from New York University. NYU. Yeah. Well, we got a source. We know it's official. But yeah, no, if those Negroes was involved in something like that, shame on them. You know what I'm saying? Because like I say, Sanger was trying to wipe us out. She didn't give a damn about no black folks. So, but that's what I'm talking about. That was in 1939. So the black church has been undermining us from the jump. You know what I'm saying? They've been undermining us. I said the 60s. I gave them too much room. They've been undermining us for a minute now. If they involved in stuff like that, you want to butcher your babies and basically tell us, hey, this is black empowerment. No, it don't work that way. It don't work that way. So anyway, I'm gonna upload this and I got to do this a lot better than I thought, and my allergies was cool. So, yeah, we good, man. I'm gonna go ahead and upload this for y'all. I appreciate it.